Oscar goes to the park and gets a big surprise. Hello and welcome to Input English. This is the 4th episode in our Bobby series, talking about Bobby, his dog Oscar, and the family. In this episode, it's Saturday morning. Craig, Bobby's older brother, and Robert, their father, went on a Boy Scout camping trip. So they left early to be with the Boy Scout troop. When Bobby got up, he went out to the utility room and saw Oscar. There was no mess on the floor. There was a little water next to the water dish, and Bobby figures that when Oscar was drinking, he splashed some of the water out. Oscar had eaten some of the food that they had put out for him. When Bobby got into the utility room, Oscar went to the door and scratched at it with his front paw. Bobby opened the door, and immediately Oscar went out in the yard to do his business. It appears that this new dog is house trained. How could that be? Don't know. Bobby went out in the yard and they played a short while, and then he was called by his mother to come to breakfast. She explained during breakfast that they would be going to the park and that they would need to have Oscar on a leash, because at the park it's important to control your dog with a leash and not just let him run free. She explained that in some parks you can let the dog run free, but in this park we should have him on a leash. After breakfast, Bobby got dressed. They went to the park. The park is near to their house. It has grass that's been mowed, lots of trees and shrubs. There's a sidewalk that winds through the park, and there's a lake. The lake is relatively large, and the park has a dock that goes out over the water so that people can sit out there or people could fish. When they got to the park, there were very few people there. Kathy explained that even though the leash has a loop and it might be tempted to put it around the wrist, she said, don't do that, because you never know what the dog's going to do, and it would be better to have the leash in your hand, because if the dog were to pull too hard, too fast, we don't want you to fall down. He would just pull the leash out of your hand, and we'll deal with getting him to come back to us as a much smaller problem compared to you falling and getting hurt. She said, people have been hurt by having their dog leash around their wrist. And then when the dog takes off on a doggy adventure, the poor person winds up on the ground, maybe with a broken bone, and maybe with the dog licking their face. Bobby hadn't thought about that. Mother's always thinking about safety. So they walked in the park with Oscar on the leash, and they got down to the lake, and exactly as predicted by Mother, the dog took off. The leash came taut. Bobby's fingers released because he wasn't strong enough to hold the leash. And Oscar ran directly toward the dock. He ran out the dock to the end of the dock, and he jumped onto the lake. Now, this is where the story becomes a little unclear, because it's impossible for us to interview Oscar and ask him what he was thinking. Running out the dock and jumping into the water surprised Kathy and Bobby. What in heaven's name is going on here? This is crazy. They were in hot pursuit. They got to the dock and they saw that Oscar was swimming. He was dog paddling and swimming, and he was swimming toward shore. He came ashore next to the dock, right about where they were standing. They moved toward him as he swam toward them. When he stepped out of the water, they were right next to him. And like all wet dogs, he shook rapidly to shake the water out of his fur. When he shook the water off his fur, he covered them in droplets of lake water, much to their surprise. So at this point, the dog is wet, they're a little wet, and they don't know why he jumped in the water. Bobby's mother suspected that this dog may have never seen a lake before. She suggested that maybe Oscar was the most surprised of all, because he might have thought that that flat surface of the lake was actually solid and that he could jump onto it and run as if it was the ground. So she was of the opinion that Oscar was even more surprised than they were. They walked around the park. Oscar sniffed everything. Bobby held the leash a little tighter because he wasn't sure what was going to happen. And after a while, they walked back to the house. They were drying off. The dog was drying off. And it was time to go home after their adventure in the park. That's the end of this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Please come back and join us for additional episodes about Bobby, the family, and Oscar. We'll see you soon. Bye.